Welcome, everyone, to the Leading Together podcast, Insights for Delaware's Tomorrow. In each episode, we sit down with leaders from across the nation and right here in Delaware to explore how to make public education leadership really turn into the long-term outcomes for students that we want to see. All of this advances First Aid Educate's mission, which is to uplift and raise awareness around school board leadership. I'm the host of your show today, Julia Keleher, Executive Director of First Aid Educate, and thank you for joining us. Very excited for our guest today. We have a wonderful person who has dedicated really the entirety of his life to service, someone that I respect and I admire for the work that he does and the person that he is. Jim Simmons, who's the special assistant to the mayor of the city of Wilmington. He's a longtime Delaware education leader. He's got 30 plus years in education in various roles. If there was a seat to sit in to know what's going on in education, Jim has been in it. But his approach is always focused on really improving teaching and learning and school climate and culture, right? And seeing those things as the environment that students and teachers are asked to be in and how that really affects student outcomes and the teaching and learning process. Currently, because there's a lot of things that he's done that he's going to tell us about, but he serves as a voting member of the Delaware State Board of Education. And before that, he worked at the Delaware Department of Education and held the role of Director of the Office of Innovation and Improvement, as well as Chief Equity Officer. Prior to the DOE, he was a principal at 2 high schools right here in Delaware. But this experience that he has in traditional public school setting, he also has different roles in a district administration, overseeing secondary school leadership, school safety and security. So, Jim, this is going to be a great conversation. Thank you so much for all you've done the entirety of your career, helping the youth in Delaware and really promoting education, and for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate thinking of me when you think about sharing some of the, I'm going to say experience. I don't know if I'd call it knowledge yet, but I'd say sharing the experiences.
Lots of experiences. You're also very good at telling a story. So I think I want to start with that, right? Let's tell the audience a little bit more about your story. Your career, you've been in roles that really center service, and you care about the city of Wilmington, and you care about students in Delaware. Why this work? Why does Wilmington matter?
I think it grew on me in terms of, when I think about being a student and what I wanted to be. I wanted to have a career that made lots of money. And I wanted to be an engineer or a lawyer. And when I was at the University of Delaware, I had the chance to coach during winter session, and I fell in love with children. Yeah. And so to me, what is more important than children who become the future of our country, and in this case of our state, right? And so I fell in love with that. And then throughout my career and all the positions that you mentioned in the intro, I never wanted to leave any of them. So I think that's important too. Like I never thought, I didn't take a job to say this is a stepping stone to do this, and then this the next one. In every job, I thought that was going to be where I landed, and for different reasons, I was offered different positions. But I think that I also value the fact that I didn't skip any rungs in that ladder, right? And so I always kept my eye on the positions beneath me, right? So that when I needed to support them, I could do it through a lens that I had already been in. Mm-hmm. I think the key to the whole thing is remember that we oftentimes forget that education is a customer service business. Mm-hmm. And our number one customer is our students, and our second customer, and when I say students and families, mm-hmm. and then our second customer are our teachers, right? And so for me, the higher you move up the ladder, the more people you serve. Mm-hmm. And so I've always kept that mindset in any role that I've had.
Mm-hmm. And you've been in a variety of different leadership positions, some at the school level, some at the district level, at the state level, at board level, right? So it's a lot of, it's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of service, this idea that people who are on boards make decisions that are significant, right? Those decisions have downstream consequences. So when you think about how you got there and all the perspective that you have from those different roles, What's it feel like to now be making decisions and on committees, right? Maybe we should maybe share a little bit about some of all the different roles that you've been in so that the audience understands.
Yeah, so I think so one, I think it's important to hear of all the roles that I've been in, the one that I cherished the most was being a high school principal,
Aw.
because to me, I got to see the culmination of the pre-K to 12 work. And that's ultimately, regardless of all those other positions, that's the
Mhm.
ultimate goal, right? We're trying to get to that post-K, whether it's the armed forces or the workforce or on to secondary education or higher education. So that's the one I cherish the most. But in all of them, I've cherished for different reasons. So I've been
Mhm.
a principal. I've been the climate and culture leader for the district. I've oversaw the secondary education at the department. My work around innovation and improvement to say we keep doing things the same way and expecting different outcomes. So why can't we figure out a way to do something different? And then
Right.
ultimately, in the last role, that the DEI work
Mhm.
was great for me because it was a new challenge. Anytime I present, I start with, I am not all knowing, I'm learning every day. And so
Mhm.
it enabled me to continue to be a lifelong learner while I'm supporting people in a different way. And when I think about the equity work, I think some key things, right? One, we use a lot of words interchangeably that aren't interchangeable.
Mhm.
And then we use words that people have some awareness of and sometimes
Mhm.
some frightening of. And so I always try to define words first. And then I say, I'm not trying
Yeah.
to change your opinion. What I'm trying to say is during the course of this conversation, that's the working definition. So we can
Ah,
hopefully be on the same page throughout
yeah.
that conversation.
I love that. Yeah, I haven't heard that before actually, to have a working definition just for the moment that you're there, You're not asking someone to subscribe to this, forever, but just to be able to have clear communication.
And
Is
it might change their opinion. But
Mhm.
what it does though is in my opinion, it brings down the defensiveness in the
Yes,
room.
sure, sure.
And oftentimes when we talk about DEI work, people
Mhm,
attribute it to race all the
mhm,
time, right? And it's not just about race. It's about race. It's about gender. It's about linguistics. It's about so many different things, sexual preference, right?
mhm,
And so I use a lot of examples. You talked about storytelling. I love telling stories
mhm,
because I think people can resonate with them. However, I also use those to take away their guardedness. Like if we
mhm.
just talked about race all the time, people become guarded and defensive. But we can talk
Mhm.
about baseball, and we'll get to the
Right,
key
right, right,
things
right.
in that conversation. So I
Mhm.
think it's important.
And how is it different from these individual conversations one-on-one with people around topics like DEI or whether it's innovation or, just trying to get things to be better, change, right? It's all about change versus sitting on a board seat because, First Aid Educate is really focused on school boards, right? We all boards really, but our principal focus, our principal client is a school board, helping them have the tools and resources. And and you have a lot of you're coming to the seat with a lot of experience, but a lot of people wind up in these seats and have these obligate and it's the first time that they're hearing about what a budget looks like that's, against a unit count that the state made up, right? Or some of these terms about the science of reading. I think it's hard to ask people to make decisions when they need supports and information and frameworks to try to know how to navigate this. So what's your take on kind of the board role and what you need to be, kind of effective in that seat?
So I think the board role is to communicate those individual conversations, right? And so one of the things I think about when you're on a board, and I don't want to pick on any one board or any one person, but when
Sure.
you think about being on a board, you're representing a constituent of folks,
Right.
not yourself. It's not Jim Simmons' vote.
Right.
My vote is supposed to
Right.
represent the city of Wilmington, in this case,
Uh-huh.
on the State Board of Education. So, how
Right.
can I represent them or vote in the fashion that supports them if I haven't had these individual conversations
Mhm.
with them?
Mhm.
I think oftentimes we vote on boards
Mhm.
based on Jim Simmons. Like, oh,
Right.
I this is beneficial for my family, but is that you're
Yeah.
there representing a constituent of folks, and so you're supposed to vote on their behalf.
Right.
One of the things I used to say when I was a principal, that is oftentimes I enforce rules that I sometimes disagree with.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think people don't understand that. But then lastly, I would add my vote is supposed to represent 51% or better of the population I serve. Right. Certainly, I hope it's closer to 90. But
Right.
like
Right.
once I get to a point where my decision or my vote is in favor of the majority, numbers wise, then I think that that's the way I'm supposed to operate as a board member,
Right.
regardless
Right.
of the topic.
And how do you source that? I mean, is there a lot of sort of ground game of engaging with the community? And, just I guess that's why it's important to be in all these spaces with all these people to listen and hear what people are saying and expressing.
It is. I'm still, believe it or not, a big note taker. So I
Uh-huh.
oftentimes have a pad with me and I write down notes and comments. And so I try to be as informed as possible. I try to attend as many meetings as I can just to hear the voice of the people
Yeah.
and find out, when I was also the voice of the Wilmington Learning Collaborative for the former governor, Carney, when we were trying to get that up and running. And one of the statements I said, if I said it once, I said it 1,000 times, is in education and probably in other fields as well, we make a lot of decisions, or we do a lot of things to and for people, but we don't do a lot of things with people. And so when you do things with people, even if they disagree, they understood that you did your due diligence to try to support the majority of that group or what you deemed best for that population of folks, the majority of that population of folks around a certain topic or issue.
Great. This was great, fascinating. I love talking with you. I'm telling you, the perspective that you bring and all these experiences, just really, it's enjoyable for me. I always feel like I learned something. Another topic, though, to move to the second part of the show, I wanted to ask about, school boards in Wilmington. Wilmington is a topic of discussion, and it probably has been for a very, very long time. There's a lot of issues that people care deeply about and that want to see get better. What's the role of the local school boards in Delaware's education system, particularly as it pertains to Wilmington? And what do those conversations kind of look like? How does it play out?
Yeah, I think that's part of the struggle, right? Like I think, and so I don't vilify any of our board members. They chose to run for a board seat, whether it's at large or by a district. And they're there really, again, to enforce and create a policy to help their district and or charter run well, right? But I think what's lost is the city of Wilmington doesn't have that representation. Now, when I say that, on every board, they have a Wilmington or city of Wilmington representative, right? But let's look at the numbers of how that works. I think all of our boards in our 3 or 4 districts in Newcastle County have 7 members, if I'm mistaken. I don't think any are larger than that. So all of them, with the exception of Red Clay, have 1 city representative. So the vote is they have 14% representation for the city of Wilmington. So regardless of how well that one person could fight and argue and try to help support the city, if the 6 other members vote against it, they really have very little representation, right? Even if you think about Red Clay, who has 2, they get 28%.
Yeah.
There's no representation truly for the city of Wilmington, right? Because it doesn't have
an equal share.
It doesn't have an equal share anywhere, where the suburbs have, in most cases, 86%, and in Red Clay's situation, what did I say, 72%, right?
Yeah. So what does that translate to for families? I mean, I guess to me, it might feel like it's hard to have your voice channeled through someone who's representing you, because even if we told you, it's, doesn't go anywhere even after I
So
told
I
you.
think that what that leads to is lack of engagement. And so they're going, yeah, I'll keep coming to these meetings and I'll keep giving you input and I'll keep doing this. And then I'll watch you get turned down 6-1.
Right. Right.
And so I think people start to say, like, I'm giving up my time, I'm giving you my energy, I'm giving you my information, and it's getting us absolutely nowhere. And historically, we've been okay with that in the state of Delaware. We've let that ride. We've tried to do some things. I don't, again, try to vilify any of the work that's happened before us, But never, ever in my, I'm going to say 35 years as an educator, and then you add my 20 years as a student, has the city of Wilmington been the focus that we lost the city of Wilmington's focus and concentration on the city of Wilmington in 1970s, in the mid 1970s. That's almost 50 years ago.
Right.
And then we wonder why performance is down, why crime is up, right? When you think about climate and culture, when I think about teaching and learning, it's never without climate and culture, because I firmly believe kids act out in classes because it's better to be bad than to be not smart. I don't like the word dumb. So if you can't read or you don't know the answer and the teacher calls on you, it's much easier to act out and get thrown out of class than it is for me to say the wrong answer or to stutter through something or can't read, because now I'm embarrassed, right? And so so if we can educate them, the behaviors go down. I firmly believe that. Now, you got to also say, like, there's behaviors that we're not going to accept, so that we can educate them. So you got to come at it from both sides. But that's what I think we've got to do around educating folks. We've got to create environments that are better. We're still living, we're working, we're educating all people, women, Black and brown children, around a model that was developed to educate white men to move them forward. It was never designed for Black and brown children or for women. I think that's important, Black or white, right? So when we think about the equity of this or the inequity of this, it was designed to educate white men. And so we're still working under that system and expecting it to impact women, students of color.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think that's a really clear way of stating it. And then I guess my one question on this, because I do want to talk a little bit about Reading, because that's another important topic these days. Does okay, not everybody sees everything the same way. So I find your argument persuasive. What do you do when you're met with someone who doesn't see it the exact same way and says that it's okay the way that it is now?
Well, so it's two things. So first, I don't proclaim that I'm all knowing. And so I think that brings down the defensive-ness, and so that we can disagree without being disagreeable. So I'm always willing to listen to other people's arguments, but your job is, so I'm a former coach, right? And I would argue that I've always led from a coaching lens. And so what I would say to my coaches all the time, when a kid makes a mistake, I don't yell at the kid, I yell at the coach. And the coaches would say, why? And I said, because I'm not saying that you didn't tell them. I'm saying you didn't say it in a manner in which they understood it. So find a different way to tell them. I would say the same thing around this debate on this system's working versus it isn't. If I say something that I believe to be true and they disagree, then I got to find a different way to say it to make them understand it, or vice versa. They need to find a different way to convince me that their thinking is better than mine.
Yeah. And I also think, maybe that's a really important difference. One is, do I understand what you say? And two is, do I agree with what you say? Because ideally, I understand and I agree, but I could understand and disagree, but do that respectfully, right? I mean, you can move from that, but what you can't move from is, I disagree disrespectfully.
Correct.
There's no next step from that.
There's no next step for that. There's no growth in that.
Right. Great. All right. So Reading. So what's that's another thing that I think is kind of, everybody talks about it, but I'm not sure everybody knows what it is, if you like space concepts, right? Like there's a black hole out there. Like, I don't know what that is. Really, I say that. I don't really know how that's constructed. If a physicist asked me, I think I'd be stuck. So Reading, there's a lot of talk of this. There was a vote the other day. Why did the commission start, and what are they trying to accomplish?
So the commission, this is I'm going to say the fourth iteration of this commission, right? So if you go back to the Neighborhood Schools Act in 2001, and I may not have all the dates right, then we went to WE Act, then we went to WEIC, and then we're now here at Reading, and all around redistricting in Newcastle County / the city of Wilmington. We have a fractured city. The intent of fracturing the city was so that one district wouldn't take on that entire burden of the city of Wilmington. But what it did is it causes a lot of problems because that population is transient. So they're we're asking families to migrate, in this case, 4 different systems because they move a block or two. So the intent is, how can we unify the city and put it in the best place to be able to support students and families in their K or pre-K to 12 experience. And so that's the nature of it. I think Reading, the difference between Reading and those other ones before that I mentioned, is that I think Reading was very purposeful in saying just redrawing the lines won't fix it. So what are those other things that are causing some of the things we're talking about, whether it's transportation, like those other
safety,
things,
access to food, all
access to
right?
all those different things are part of it. So we're trying to say the wraparound services that Reading helped to provide says that we're not just giving you a building, oftentimes a dilapidated building, right? But giving you a building and giving you students and saying, oh, that's the fix. What we're saying is we're going to wrap our arms around those kids and those families and help you as you receive those students and buildings, right? In this case, the vote was for a Newcastle County district, which fundamentally I believe in. I think that's the hardest move, right? Because now instead of getting 1 or 2 districts to comply, you now got to get 4 to comply. But I also would argue the argument for not doing it is that, large districts don't work. Well, there's districts in our country that have more students than we have people in the state of Delaware.
This is true.
Is your argument valid? I believe Fairfax County has 1.2 million students. I think we're right about 1.1 million residents. So having a district that has, even if we did it evenly, we have roughly 140,000 students in the state of Delaware. If we divide that by 3, right, you're getting 55 students in each, 55,000 students in each county. I think we can do it, right? The numbers are a little skewed because 70% of our students are upstate in Newcastle County. But even skewing it to 70%, it's not a number that can't work. So Reading's decision in December was to go to a Newcastle County district. I actually believe that if we can get this implemented and successful, it helps the other 2 counties, right? When you look at the inequities, I always pick on Sussex, but not because I dislike them. I pick on them because it's easy to talk about. When you look at Eastern Sussex with Cape Penelope, Indian River, money's not really an issue there. But when you look at Western Sussex, the demographics completely different. The financial resources completely different. So it's a way of becoming equitable, right? But not necessarily equal. We can find a way to better fund those other districts that are struggling financially that may never get a referendum passed, right? So I think that this opens the door for us to fix education statewide.
Broadly. Yeah. Interesting. And if people, I know they made the decision, but if people if they want to engage, kind of, where is there still an opportunity if, people are hearing this and they say, I have a thought, I have an idea, I want to tell somebody something. What do they do?
So ongoing meetings, I believe, I don't have the date right in front of me, but the next whole body meeting is in February. I want to say February 12th. Don't hold me to that date. I can check. February 12th. But from that meeting, subcommittees are going to be established. And I'd argue they'll be meeting on a weekly basis around certain topics as they develop a full plan that they have to present to the board. It's supposed to be presented to the board in February, but we're not locking into to say, if we don't get it by February, we're not doing it. If we need to slide the date because to make sure we present a feasible plan, I think people are willing to do that. Locking into deadlines often gets us in trouble, either by we don't meet the deadline, so we cancel, or we don't meet the deadline. We meet the deadline and we present a product that's not completely fleshed out, right?
And they're presenting to whom? Which board?
So they have to create their Reading Consortiums has to create a detailed plan that has to go through to the state board. The state board then has 90 days to review that plan, vote upon that plan, and then it goes to the General Assembly for their vote. This iteration does not go back to the local school boards as it did in WEIC. and
Okay.
react.
So 90, so if it was just to do a quick run of the calendar, so if it was the mid-February, 90 days from that, that's 3 months. So March, April, May, maybe not enough time for a decision in the legislature this year, but could get in at least to be able to be on top for next year.
But I would even argue next year would be too long. And again, I certainly don't want to speak in terms of how that works at the General Assembly, but we can have a special session as needed. I believe that they can call for a special session. So let's say that the 90 days gets us to July, a special session in August, just around this topic to vote, so that we can get the work moving forward. I don't know that waiting till January, just because that's when we always done it, would be an option. Remember, they're only in session January to July.
Right, exactly. All right, last section of our conversation, and I know you have great ideas on this. What do we do? My vision, right, is that Delaware is going to move from 45th in reading and 47th in math. We're going to become one of the top 10. I sincerely believe that if we train school boards, we give them the resources that they need, we support them in their decision making. If we stop leaving them with no recourse and everything's going to get a little bit better when there's a coherent conversation and they're seen as part of the solution. I think the whole state moves forward. That's me. What do you think it takes to make Delaware public schools, one of the best in the nation?
So one, I think whatever plan, we can argue whether the plan's good or bad. What we haven't done is stayed with the plan long enough. Oftentimes we implement something and then 3 years later, we didn't see the results that we wanted to see. And so we change it, right? And we throw, we throw the kid out with the bathwater, right? So I think we need a plan I used to say this when I was a principal, let's put something in pre-K, and we're not changing it until those pre-K kids are seniors in high school. Because the other thing that we do is we compare apples to oranges every time we do accountability. When I was a principal, we looked at kids disciplined that were coming to our building as 8th graders, right? And when you looked at what they did in middle school, we would say, this 9th grade class is going to give us it's going to be some challenges. Right? So
actually, I know that feeling. I know that feeling.
So let's make sure that we are on top of our P's and Q's. We don't have to change the rules, but we can't lax because this group is bringing some more challenges to the next group. It doesn't mean they're bad kids. It just means that they've struggled with managing how schools work, right? So we got to be on our P's and Q's. So what we do around accountability is we say, Julia's cohort in 3rd grade was at 40%, but Jim's next grade has to be higher than 40%. But we started lower. Right. So we started lower, and you expect us to grow more. And then when we don't, we blame the teachers, the schools, the system, and we want to throw everything out, right? So I think a growth model helps to get real numbers. I think we've set up an accountability system that is pass fail, right? You get a 3 or a 4, you pass, you get a 1 or a 2, and all of a sudden you fail, right? And so I used to say this to students all the time. If you tell me that a D is the best you could possibly do, you worked your tail off for a D, right? I'll take that over a kid who slept his way through a B.
I gotta know, right.
Because that kid who was working his tail off is grinding to learn, and I guarantee they probably learned more than the kid who walked through a B because the class was easy and didn't challenge themselves. So I think we've got to be careful about that, but I think we got to change things and really look at cohorts of students and look at where they've grown from. Because that's what we ultimately want. We want everybody to get better. When everybody gets better, then we all win.
Yep.
You talked about being 43rd. I'd be glad to stay at 43rd because somebody's going to be 43rd and somebody's going to be 50, right? But if let's say 50 meant that we were all at 86%. What's wrong with being 50 if you're 86%? Right. Depends. Right? So I think we're going for
the top 5, just to be clear.
I got you.
Jim, always a pleasure, entertaining and informative conversation. I love that a couple ideas stuck with me. Support the people who are in other roles that you've been in, and this idea of customer service, education as customer service, the student, the families, and the teachers, that words matter, and get a working definition that allows people to get to next and keep that conversation going. The importance of having the community represented in that board member's vote. Now, whoever it is, whether it's you for the city or if it's these districts, which that was eye-opening, is 14%. But also, I think helpful to know about Reading. If folks are out there and they want to still get engaged, there's time. I think this concept of a countywide district, that's coming. So glad we put that out there. And to end on, I think a growth model is the right thing. But if you got a plan, you got to stick with it. So Jim Simmons, fabulous conversation. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the conversation.
Thanks to our listeners for joining us again. And you can find resources on all these topics and more in our Knowledge Hub. We'll see you next time. Thanks.